This is a real-life 100% story that happened to me. In 2003, I met a guy who said he would take me on adventures and make my life exciting. Little did I know that the safe world I had grown up in was about to get shattered. I lived in a small town and had never really traveled outside of my state. I had never experienced life in a way that others would. We were kind of sheltered from the big crime and other things that had been happening over the countryside. So my now ex decided to take me on a journey of being an over-the-road truck driver. In a lot of cases, this was a great experience. There were a lot of fun times and I got to see most of the US. But trucking life is hard, and being on the road 24/7 isn't easy. Being cooped up in a small truck with someone for that long will cause anyone to become mad. Life on the road is much different now than it was when I was trucking. People now have advancements in technology and the ability to binge watch your favorite YouTube channel, surf the web, or play games on your phone to keep yourself occupied. The only forms of entertainment we had were either watching one of the dozen or so DVDs, reading yet another book, or talking on the radio. We often opted for talking on the radio, and this became our version of social media long before Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter were even a thought. Just like we do now, we create a different identity or persona to hide behind while interacting with people who are basically strangers. And trust me, truckers can be creepy AF, and keeping a bit of anonymity is the only way to stay safe on the road. When you're a trucker, you acquire a CB handle. My ex's was Ninja Dwarf, changed for his safety, and since I was a baby barely 20 years old and I'm from Alaska, mine ended up being Northern Exposure, again changed for safety reasons. During the time on the road, you meet a lot of crazy people, and you see a ton of crazy stuff. And I do mean a ton of crazy stuff. People often hear about stories of things that happen on the road. Most of them are more gross than scary. You know, like drivers getting a little too friendly with their cabin buddy, whether it be a dog, cat, or even a goat. But this time was one of the most terrifying experiences I had in my life. And when it comes to strange and unusual events, my life is full of them. Have you ever gotten the heebie-jeebies from someone's voice? Like flat out scared to talk to someone? A voice that makes you think that the person on the other line is not all there. That was this guy. Something about him just made my skin crawl, and I had only ever heard his voice through the crackle of the CB radio. The CB started to crackle, and we heard the distant call. You could barely hear a voice through the static, but eventually he got close enough we could hear him clearly. He must have been 50 miles or so behind us because it was still faint, but our CB radio was peaked and tweaked and could really reach out and touch someone, so we could just hear him through the chatter of the CB. And then I heard it. That voice. It's hard to explain, but the best way I could now describe it would be like how Heath Ledger talks as the Joker in the Batman movie. There was something just off about it, and it gave me the chills. He simply said, "Hey there, Purple Pete, the color of our truck, where ya headed?" My ex hollered back we were heading to Arkansas. The driver said he was going the same way and asked if he could tag along with us and introduced himself as Maniac. We would run from one coast to the other and back again. The guy always seemed to be running the same route as us, but we had never physically seen his truck. He described it as a 378 long-nosed Peterbilt that was black and had a brow and cattle guard. According to him, he ran dry box from California to Florida, which explained why he always seemed to be either coming or going on the I-10. One week when we were running from Florida back to LA, we caught up to him on his back trip from Redmond, Washington to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He told us he would meet up with us in Nevada when we did our trip back, because by that time we would have run out of hours and needed to take a rest. We said sure, even though I totally didn't want to meet this guy. My ex had become friends with him, so we gave him an ETA on when we would be back in the area and what truck stop we would be at, and told him we would meet up for a meal with him. This was really before the idea of having a cell phone for anything other than emergencies, so it wasn't like we could just call him when we were going to be in the area. He agreed, and we parted ways. My ex continued talking to him until the radios would no longer reach. We had finished our load and were heading back to Las Vegas to the truck stop we agreed on and waited. Las Vegas is a shady place for truckers in general. Lots of crime, lots of bad stuff happens, so we waited in the truck. Finally, we got bored and ventured into the truck stop for a bit. We waited and eventually killed enough time where we could take another load, so we headed out, never actually meeting up with him in Nevada. But a few months later, we ran into him in Oklahoma. We had heard some chatter on the radio about these lot lizards, truck stop hookers getting brutally murdered at truck stops in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. but chalked it up to drama on the radio after all. We had quite literally nothing better to do than to make up truck driver stories. We had kept hearing about it, and even brought it up to Maniac. And he just laughed and said it must be one real sick fuck doing it. It must just be a story, because if it was true they would have caught him already. I bet he has even left fingerprints or semen at the crime scene. With as bloody and messy as it was, I bet he wants to get caught. It seemed like a weird thing to say, but he was a very weird guy, so that was totally in character for him. Maniac went his way, and we went ours, and after a while I forgot about the weird comment. Fast forward to a few weeks later, we were in Mississippi, and we hear a familiar voice on the radio. It was Maniac. We had taken a long weekend because it was Labor Day, and most companies were okay with drivers taking an extra day off. Our plan was to make it to this lake out in the middle of nowhere. We were going to drop our trailer and head out bobtail. So we chatted, and he said he was heading to Tennessee and that he would be heading out the next morning. And so, cutting our much-needed break short and bypassing the weekend at the lake, my ex decided to run with him so that there was someone to talk to. We had gotten into an argument earlier, and I wasn't talking to him. And he absolutely hated the silent treatment. Our load was to deliver in North Carolina in a few days, so being a few hours ahead of the deadline just meant we would be at the top of the line to pick our load back. Win-win. We left that morning and headed out. The guys decided we would stop in Tennessee, and finally, after about 6 months of chatting, meet each other. We weren't afraid to meet up with him, but I was still very on edge. Now I was no slouch. I grew up with 15 boys in the house and was a known fighter. My ex was a bigger dude, standing 6'3" and about 280 pounds. So in theory, we could take him if need be. The only way he could get the best of us was if he had a weapon, which back then was highly illegal to have in the trucks, and if you were caught by Dot, it was jail time, no questions asked. With our company, we had very specific fuel stations we could use to top off. Maniac was an owner-operator, so he could go anywhere. Maniac said he'd already stopped to get fuel and took a shower, but he would drop his trailer and meet us at a Flying J petrol station that was down the road from where he was, which I believe was a Love's fuel station. So we got ready to fuel up, we showered, and got a booth at the restaurant. We waited about 45 minutes before ordering food, and waited and waited. No one ever showed up, and there was no way to contact him. My ex was not a patient man, so we ate and then headed back to our truck. I remember it being dark and humid. It was probably 10 p.m. or so. There wasn't much for noise in this truck stop, which was unnerving. A quiet truck stop is a creepy truck stop. We walked across the fuel island to be greeted with a ton of flashing lights. It's not uncommon for either lizards to get busted or drivers to get involved in stuff they are not supposed to, so we didn't think much of it. Cops and a truck stop go hand in hand. But this was more than just your typical truck stop shenanigans. We passed 12 trucks or so. This was one of the bigger Flying JS, so it could probably fit about 80 truck and trailers if you went all the way back to the dirt. And then you could Tetris a dozen or so trucks in the dirt lot, which happened to be where our truck was. Now I'm a curvy girl, not fat, but I don't look like I belong in a truck stop. I was used to drivers looking at me all creepy like. I always got taunted and harassed for being a lot lizard even though I was a driver. In fact, there are some truck stops that are not safe to walk in alone. I was walking with my ex, and we weren't holding hands or anything, but it was obvious I was with him. We walked down the row and saw a bobtail truck parked in a full parking spot. I thought it was weird he was in a truck space with no trailer. Typically, bobtail trucks will park at the end of a run and leave the big spaces for trucks with trailers, because that was again another unspoken truck driver rule. We moved by the bobtail truck. It was a dark truck, maybe a dark black or blue with a cattle guard and a brow. I don't remember seeing what type of truck it was, just that it was kind of menacing in the dark. Old school trucker code was if you were looking for company, the driver would park and leave his reading red light on to tell lot lizards that the driver was looking for entertainment. The guy was sitting in the passenger seat. He had the red reading light on, so I could see his face. It was a little distorted, but he gave me the creepiest smile and then quickly shut his blinds. We were about 6 trucks down from the bobtail. I could see his truck from ours. I remember looking back and seeing the red light still illuminating the porthole window in the passenger door, and a small slit down the curtain showed a dark spot. He was still watching us. Even with as warm as it was, chills shot up my spine, and I got a very uneasy feeling, my gut wrenched with a sudden feeling of dread. We finally got back to the truck and turned on the CB for our night entertainment and to see if we could radio Maniac to see what the deal was. The chatter was about all the cops and the ambulance, fire truck, and Dot. All the commotion was basically across from us, but 2 rows up. People were saying there was a dead lot lizard, and that it was bad, like gnarly. One driver started trying to explain it, but he was then told that he had to keep his mouth shut by a police officer. Being the nosy people we are, my ex and I jumped out of the truck to go investigate. We dodged in and out of the trucks and managed to wiggle our way up to the scene. You know when you hear the phrase, "some things cannot be unseen." This was one of them. The lady, what was left of her, had been tied to the trailer in the truck. Then someone pulled the kingpin, that piece that locks the 2 together, and let down the landing gear. The driver, who was now sitting in the back of a police car, cuffed, his head hung limp with his forehead on the back of the seat. He was crying big heavy sobs, and there was vomit on his shirt. We could hear them through the closed door, wailing that he had nothing to do with it, and praying to God to be forgiven for what he had done. That poor driver had obviously not done his safety check before he left and just decided to pull out of his space. While she was fucking attached. She got ripped apart, right in half. Without getting too graphic, I can tell you that a normal human body should never look like that, and it was like something you would probably see in the Saw movies. I remember stumbling back and bumping into another driver. He just looked at me pale and looked as if he was going to get sick. I don't do well with that body function, so I moved quickly away from him and started making my way back to the truck. I was almost running back, 0 fucks given that I should have waited for my ex because he had the keys. I made it to the truck and tugged on the door, but it wouldn't open. So I ran to the truck stop full speed. I was going to get sick, and I would rather not have people see me. I passed the spot where the bobtail truck was parked, and it was gone. My ex made it into the truck stop looking for me, and he said he would walk me back to the truck so I could get some sleep. Yeah, right, like I could sleep after seeing that. He turned on the radio and began to talk to the other drivers. No one had seen anything. There hadn't even been much lizard traffic. The police had been working overtime cleaning up the truck stops after they had caught wind of the first few murders. I sat in the bunk, just kind of staring out of the windshield at the flashing lights. There was a tap on the door. A police officer said he was getting statements from everyone in the truck stop, giving us the rundown about safety in numbers and not going anywhere alone. I wasn't planning on leaving the truck. I told him about the creepy guy that smiled at me in the bobtail truck and the description of the truck. The officer didn't see the point of me telling him about a creepy guy, but he took down the information anyway. I don't think I slept for days after that. I just kept seeing that image. Flashes kept going through my head. The vivid image of her face. She had a red rag in her mouth and the 100 mph tape around her wrists, tying her to the headache rack. She had obviously struggled because there were bruises formed on her stomach and her face. Mascara was running down her cheeks. And the smell like rotted meat and blood. It makes my stomach queasy just thinking about it. It didn't seem to faze my ex. He went on like it wasn't anything big or special. After a few weeks, I finally managed to get the image out of my head, or I had finally convinced myself that it wasn't real, and it was just a scene from a horror movie. Either way, I was glad for the time being to have it out of my head. Fast forward to February, about 3 months after that incident, and we were heading to New Orleans. I was super excited to see the area and hopefully get in to see the Mardi Gras. I wanted to visit the cemeteries to see the mausoleums and go into the voodoo shops and such. We had a few extra hours to spend there, so I was happy when my ex said we could go wandering around. We parked at this little truck stop. It was one that didn't show up on the Big Rand McNally maps. We were told about it by another driver. It really wasn't more than a hole-in-the-wall mom-and-pop shop with a small dirt lot and a flickering light pole on one end, but it was within walking distance of the French Quarter, which was where I wanted to go. "Hey there, Purple Pete. What brings you out this way?" The voice on the CB was loud, so he was really close. There were only 2 other trucks in the lot, an old Freightliner hauling a Swift trailer and a dark green Kenworth that had a cattle car on the back, hauling cows. My ex was still a bit miffed about being stood up months ago. He could really hold a grudge when he wanted. "Maniac, hey man, where the hell have you been? Why did you stand us up there, good buddy?" My ex radioed back. "Oh man, you know how it is. Cops make me a bit uneasy, and I'd rather not get caught," he said with a chuckle. "Caught? What do you mean, caught?" My ex questioned. "Don't worry about it, you just keep an eye on your girl." I'd really hate for something bad to happen to her, like all of those other girls he trailed off. We watched the CB key up again, burying the needle on the radio. The signal was high, it had to be in the same truck stop to ping so high. Silence. He was keyed up, but just kind of breathing in the mic. You know, with all the bad things I have been doing in the truck stops, I like to play with the lizards before I torture them and destroy them. Those nasty sluts. They shouldn't be defiling themselves with the drugs and the sex like they do. It sounded like he was talking through gritted teeth. Silence. His voice was even louder this time. We could hear the rumble of a truck heading down the one-way street that ended in the truck stop. Only God and the devil himself can judge me for my sins. I will continue to rid this world of the diseased ones that plague humanity. We looked at each other. This was the only time I had ever seen anything like fear in my ex's eyes. Tears began to well up, and for the first time I was scared, truly scared. A dust cloud came rolling up into the truck stop, and this dark, black, menacing Peterbilt with a cattle guard and brow came rolling by slowly. The driver keyed up just as he went past the nose of our truck. It was that same creepy guy from the truck stop months ago. He smiled that disgusting smile at us as he put the mic to his lips. Be safe out there, Ninja Dwarf in Northern Exposure. His CB handle was pinstriped on his driver door. It said Maniac in bright red letters. In April of 2004, we headed back to Alaska because my ex's father had a massive heart attack. We stayed there for a while before heading back on the road. As far as I know, there were 7 total murders. There could have been more. Who knows how long he had actually been ridding the world of its sins. I don't know if the guy was ever caught. I can tell you one thing though. The second time around I wasn't making friends with anyone on the road, and I always kept a 6 blade on me at all times, just in case I ever ran into Maniac.